Hi YouTube, it's Pen Paper 19, day 2 of the Colorvent calendar. So, a couple things from yesterday, day 1 actually. In my haste and excitement, I neglected to realize that inside the doors, they actually have a little description of the ink. So yesterday I did Supergiant, which was a really nice deep red. And apparently Supergiant is a color inspired by supergiants, which are hot, bright stars. I actually really like these. I may figure out a way to keep the door. Anyways, the other thing is I really didn't like how when I wrote out the sentence to show what it would look like in a type of pen I would normally use, since I write in a pretty fine, with a pretty fine nib. I didn't like the one that I did yesterday because it was just too thick. The pen that I was using was kind of dumping ink, and this is not how I would normally write. So I redid it, and I think I used just a finer pen. I used the Hokoro dip pen in a fine nib, and this is a pretty fine nib. So this is more, this is truer to how I would write. And so the ink, when written through a really finer nib, has a brown to it. It's like a, when I say deep red, it's like a reddish brown, which is a really usable pen. Like if it were bright, like tomato or candy apple red, I think that would be hard for me to use. It's not the type of reds I like. So this is a really usable red. So I like that. Anyways, that was for day 1, which was yesterday, but today is day 2. So let's go ahead and open day 2. This one is Edge of Night. I can figure out a way to get it out. So Edge of Night is a color inspired by the dusky moment when night ends and dawn begins. So it is a blue. I think of all the colored inks I have, blue is probably the most common. I have the most varieties of blue. Lovely. Okay, so here's my Wearing Goal swatch card. Let's swatch this ink. Oh. Very pretty. Actually, let me just keep that here. That's yeah, the ink in this pen is too thick for me to use in a writing sample. But anyways, it's a nice, fairly flat blue, dark blue-gray. That's what I would say. So if we compare it with the inks I already have, okay, it's actually not that easy for me to find a color that's quite like Edge of Night, which I guess is a good thing. Edge of Night definitely, for a dark blue, has more of a gray undertone than some of my other blues. So I found a bunch of dark blues that I have that I can compare with. So the Robert Oster Blue Night, the Robert Oster is definitely blue, like bluer if you just look at the writing, but it looks like the swatch, I used a lot more ink in the swatch, but if you look at the writing, it's actually not that different. It's actually pretty similar. but I do think that there's just a hint more gray in the Colorverse. The other similar, actually this is not similar because this is the Diamine Storm from the Inkvent 2021, day 9, and I think this one has shimmer in it. So obviously not the same because the Colorverse does not have shimmer, but there is a hint of gray here, at least in this swatch. It's really hard to tell when written because of the shimmer, but they don't look terribly different either. Obviously this dumped a lot more ink. Now, when I originally saw the Colorverse color, I immediately thought of the Pilot Shizuku Shinkai, and I wondered if it was the same. There is similarity, definitely. If you look at, especially this flatter swatch here, because it shades a lot more up there, the Pilot definitely has a nice shading up here. But if you look at the flat wash, they're actually pretty similar. Actually, they are pretty close. I was going to say that Colorverse has more gray, but I think it might, but it's kind of hard for me to know. I'd have to do a really close test of using the exact same amount of ink to really know, but they're pretty close. The other ink that I thought of and wondered about was the Sailor Ink Studio 442, which is actually pretty close as well. I do think this is more of a deeper, like a navy blue. This one, again, seems to have a little bit more gray, but they're not terribly different. And then just because this is another Colorverse ink, I thought it'd be nice to compare with the Colorverse Apollo 11. The Apollo 11 definitely has a purple cast, whereas the Colorverse is more of a true dark blue-gray. But those were some of the ones that stuck out to me as being similar to Edge of Night. So now if we were to compare these inks in the two different Tomorrow River paper, the old Tomorrow River paper, and like I made just a horrific mess in this and smudged it, so I'm going to do this slightly differently today because I really don't like how messy this got. This is actually a really pleasant color. I will definitely enjoy writing with this color. It's just a nice blue-gray. And this is the new Tomorrow River paper. Lovely. And actually, just to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to write with the Hokuro fine nib. This is a more faithful and accurate representation of the way that the ink would write in this notebook for me, since it's a little bit finer. Again, oftentimes I use an even finer nib, but this is certainly within the realm of what I would normally use. Okay. So I can already see that the shading, I think the shading is a little bit more pronounced in the old Tomorrow River paper. This is the current 2024 cousin. And here there's some nice shading here. Light ghosting, no actual bleed through. Looks nice on this. I do think in the new Tomorrow River paper, this is my 2025 cousin, the wash does look flatter. I don't think it shades as well. Now if I compare, so now I feel like I'm getting a few more data points. If I look at day 1 and day 2 of the 2024 paper, I definitely have more shading with the Supergiant and more shading with the Edge of Night. I have less shading with the Supergiant and the Edge of Night on the new paper. You know, even accounting for some variance of how much ink I lay down, I do think that there is a difference in how the papers pull out shading quality. But there is no bleed through. There's your kind of typical, you can probably see typical ghosting, but no bleed through of the ink, no feathering, no weirdness. It writes nicely, but a little bit more flat, right? It just doesn't show the shading as well. I do like shading, but I would typically expect more heavily shading paper to not dry as well, or at least take longer to dry. So we'll see. It's certainly a little bit prettier when it brings out the characteristics in the old paper, but don't seem to have any actual issues with the new paper. Okay, and then writing the sentence. There you go. That's Edge of Night. Definitely has like a navy blue that's been dampered with gray. It's actually really nice. I could definitely see myself using both of these inks I really like. All right, that's day 2. See you tomorrow.